It was a typical Friday afternoon, and 17-year-old Sarah was enjoying a late lunch at KFC. She had just finished her chicken and was about to head to the bathroom when suddenly everything went black. When Sarah came to, she was lying on the cold, hard floor. Her head was pounding, and she felt disoriented. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. She looked around and saw that the restaurant was completely empty. The lights were off, and the doors were locked. Sarah panicked. She tried to scream for help, but her voice was barely a whisper. She crawled towards the door, hoping to find someone outside, but the doors were locked tight. Sarah was alone in the KFC. She had no idea what had happened. She had only been in the bathroom for a few minutes, and now it was dark outside. Sarah tried to remember if she had been drugged or if someone had attacked her, but she couldn't recall anything. All she knew was that she needed to get out of there. Sarah searched the restaurant for a phone, but there was none. She tried to use her cell phone, but there was no signal. She realized that she was completely cut off from the outside world. As the hours ticked by, Sarah's panic turned into fear. She had no food, no water, and no idea how to get out of the restaurant. The darkness and silence of the KFC were overwhelming. Sarah felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. She tried to keep herself occupied by exploring the restaurant. She searched for a way out, but every door and window was locked. She looked for any signs of life, but the restaurant was completely empty. She even tried to find a way to turn on the lights, but there was no electricity. Sarah began to feel like she was going crazy. The isolation and darkness were too much for her to handle. She started to see things out of the corner of her eye, and she heard strange noises coming from the kitchen. She was convinced that she was not alone in the restaurant. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's situation only grew more desperate. She was starving, dehydrated, and terrified. She tried everything she could think of to get out of the KFC, but nothing worked. She even tried to break a window, but the glass was too thick. Sarah was beginning to lose hope. She didn't know how much longer she could survive in the restaurant. She felt like she was living in a nightmare, and there was no end in sight. But one day, Sarah heard a noise outside the restaurant. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and louder. She thought it was her imagination, but then she heard voices. She rushed to the door and banged on it as hard as she could. She screamed for help, hoping that someone would hear her. And finally, someone did. The police arrived at the restaurant and found Sarah lying on the floor, barely conscious. They rushed her to the hospital, where she was treated for severe dehydration and malnourishment. It turned out that Sarah had been trapped in the KFC for over a month. The doors had accidentally been locked when the restaurant closed, and no one had noticed that she was still inside. She had survived on scraps of food and water from the bathroom sink. Sarah's ordeal was over, but the trauma stayed with her for the rest of her life. She was never able to eat at KFC again, and the darkness of the restaurant haunted her dreams. She felt like she had been to the brink of death and back, and she never wanted to experience anything like it again. After her ordeal, Sarah became an advocate for safety regulations and emergency protocols in public places. She wanted to ensure that no one would ever have to go through what she had experienced. Despite her efforts, Sarah struggled to cope with the aftermath of her traumatic experience. She suffered from nightmares and anxiety, and the memories of the KFC haunted her every waking moment. Sarah's parents were also affected by their daughter's experience. They felt guilty for not realizing that their daughter was missing and for not reporting her absence to the authorities. They had to undergo therapy to overcome the guilt and trauma. Sarah's story became national news, and she was interviewed by several news outlets. People around the country were shocked and horrified by what had happened to her, and they rallied around her to offer support. One day, Sarah received a letter from the CEO of KFC. He expressed his deep regret for what had happened to her and offered to pay for her medical bills and counseling expenses. He also promised to review the company's safety protocols to ensure that nothing like this would ever happen again. At first, Sarah was hesitant to accept the offer. She didn't want to be associated with KFC or anything that reminded her of her trauma. But after some consideration, she realized that accepting the CEO's offer could help her move on from her experience and bring about positive change. With the CEO's help, Sarah founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to advocating for safety and emergency protocols in public places. She became a well-known speaker and traveled around the country sharing her story and encouraging others to speak out about their own experiences. Sarah's organization gained a lot of support, and it helped to bring about new safety regulations in public places across the country. Her efforts had made a difference, and she knew that her traumatic experience had not been in vain. Years later, Sarah looked back on her experience at KFC with a mix of sadness and gratitude. She had been through a terrifying ordeal, but it had also given her a sense of purpose and a way to make a positive impact on the world. In the end, Sarah's story was a reminder of the importance of safety regulations and emergency protocols in public places. It showed that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope and the possibility of change. Sarah's advocacy work for safety regulations and emergency protocols in public places continued to make a significant impact on society. Her organization gained more and more support, and Sarah became a well-known figure in the field of public safety. As a result of her efforts, new laws and regulations were introduced, which required all public places to have emergency protocols in place. This meant that anyone who required assistance would be able to receive it promptly, and incidents like Sarah's would be avoided in the future. Sarah continued to work tirelessly for her cause, and she became known for her dedication and passion. She received many awards and honors for her advocacy work, and her story inspired others to speak out about their own traumatic experiences. Years later, Sarah looked back on her experience at KFC with a sense of closure. She knew that she had turned a tragic experience into a force for good, and her efforts had made the world a safer place for everyone. In the end, Sarah's story was a powerful reminder that one person can make a difference, and that even the most traumatic experiences can be transformed into something positive.